The ion storm painted the sky of Nova Esperanza in shades of violet and electric blue, forcing Commander Elena Reyes to squint through her helmet's polarized visor. The colony's defense grid was failing, and as chief military engineer, she knew they had precious little time before their shields would collapse completely. Her boots crunched against the crystalline soil as she made her way to the final backup generator. The colonists had chosen this world for its rich mineral deposits, but no one had predicted the severity of its atmospheric disturbances. Elena's suit sensors screamed warnings as another wave of ionic energy cascaded overhead, threatening to overwhelm their remaining defenses. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the storm's ethereal howls. A deep, resonant cry that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Elena's hand instinctively moved to her pulse rifle as she turned toward the source. Through the storm's purple haze, she saw something impossible. A massive creature, easily twice the size of a dropship, lay wounded against the jagged crystals that dotted the landscape. Its scales shimmered with an iridescent copper glow, and despite its clearly alien nature, Elena recognized pain in its eyes, eyes that gleamed with unmistakable intelligence. By all the stars, Elena whispered, her training warring with her curiosity. The creature was a dragon, something straight out of Earth's ancient myths, yet here it was on a colony world light years from humanity's birthplace. The dragon's head turned toward her, and Elena felt the weight of centuries in its gaze. Human, it spoke, its voice carrying perfectly despite the storm's chaos. I am Vesran Moonweaver, and I seek asylum. Elena's combat training screamed at her to retreat, but something else, something deeper, kept her rooted in place. Behind the dragon, she noticed movement. 3 smaller forms huddled in the relative shelter of their mother's wings, each one no larger than a horse. My children, Vesran said, her voice carrying both pride and desperation. We fled the sundering of our homeworld. The storm damaged our biofields. Without shelter. She left the implications hanging in the air. Elena's mind raced. The colony's regulations were clear about first contact protocols, but they had never anticipated anything like this. The dragon's presence could explain the strange energy readings they'd been detecting for the past week, readings that had been dismissed as storm interference. I'm Commander Elena Reyes, she found herself saying, lowering her weapon. Military engineer of Nova Esperanza colony. But you already knew we were here, didn't you? Vesran's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval. We observed your settlement. Your people's resilience, it reminded me of our own. Before the sundering. A particularly violent surge of ionic energy crackled overhead, and one of the young dragons whimpered. Elena's decision crystallized in that moment. Regulations be damned, she couldn't leave them to die in the storm. Our shield facility has an auxiliary bay, she said, already reaching for her comm unit. It's designed for large maintenance vehicles, but it should accommodate you. If you're willing to submit to some basic security protocols. We accept, Vesran said without hesitation. And in return, I offer you knowledge. Your shields, they cannot withstand these storms indefinitely. My people mastered similar challenges millennia ago. Perhaps this could be the beginning of an exchange beneficial to both our kinds. Elena signaled her base while watching the dragon family struggle to rise. In the back of her mind, she knew this decision would change everything, her career, the colony's future, possibly the course of human history itself. But as she helped guide them toward shelter, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. As they walked, Vesran spoke of her world, of a civilization that had spanned galaxies before being torn apart by forces they had barely understood. Her children, despite their obvious exhaustion, peppered Elena with questions about human technology and culture. The youngest dragon, whom Vesran called Lysander, seemed particularly fascinated by Elena's powered armor. Your artificial scales, he chirped, they channel energy like ours do naturally. Elena found herself explaining basic engineering principles to an eager audience of dragon younglings, while simultaneously coordinating with her increasingly bewildered security team. By the time they reached the shield facility's massive doors, she had already begun mentally composing her report to Colonial Command. Inside, as the dragon settled into the auxiliary bay, Elena realized that her world had irreversibly changed. In Vesrin's grateful eyes, she saw not just the possibility of technological exchange, but something far more valuable, the chance for two species to learn from each other's strengths and overcome their weaknesses together. The storm raged on outside, but within the facility, an unprecedented cooperation was taking its first tentative steps. Elena watched as her engineering team cautiously approached the dragons, their initial fear giving way to professional curiosity as Vesrin began explaining concepts that would revolutionize their understanding of energy manipulation. As she observed this historic moment, Elena couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from careful planning, but from the courage to show compassion in the face of the unknown. The real challenge, she knew, was only beginning. Dawn broke over Nova Esperanza, casting long shadows through the crystalline formations that surrounded the colony. In the shield facility's auxiliary bay, Commander Elena Reyes stood before a holographic display, watching in amazement as Vesrin traced complex energy patterns with a single graceful claw. Your current shield configuration fights against the ionic currents, the dragon matriarch explained, her copper scales gleaming under the artificial lights. But observe how our ancestors learned to weave their protection. The hologram shifted, showing intricate layers of energy that danced and flowed like liquid light. Elena's engineering team worked feverishly to incorporate these new principles into their systems. But not everyone in the colony shared their enthusiasm. Colonel Harrison Wade's face appeared on a nearby screen, his expression stern. Commander Reyes, the Colonial Defense Council demands an explanation. You've granted asylum to unregistered xenomorphic entities without proper clearance. This breach of protocol. With respect, Colonel, Elena interrupted, these entities just helped us increase shield efficiency by 300%. The storm that would have breached our defenses in days now barely registers as a threat. Wade's eyes narrowed. That's precisely what concerns us, Commander. Their level of technological advancement. A low rumble interrupted him as Vesrin moved into view of the screen. Perhaps, the dragon matriarch said, her voice carrying that ancient weight that still sent shivers down Elena's spine, your council would prefer to discuss matters directly with me. The colonel's face paled slightly, but he maintained his composure. That might be arranged. In the meantime, Commander Reyes remains responsible for your containment. After the screen went dark, Elena turned to Vesrin. I apologize for. No need, Vesrin said, watching her three children as they interacted with the engineering team. Young Lysander was proving particularly adept at understanding human technology, while his siblings, Cyrus and Nara, helped reinforce the facility's structural supports with their innate ability to manipulate energy fields. Fear of the unknown is a survival trait common to all intelligent species. But so is curiosity. Elena nodded, but something in Wade's tone had disturbed her. She'd known the colonel for years, and his reaction seemed off. As if he'd been expecting something like this. Her suspicions deepened that evening when she received an encrypted message from an old friend in colonial intelligence. The data packet contained surveillance footage from other colonies, showing brief glimpses of draconic shapes in the night sky, quickly dismissed as atmospheric phenomena. They're not the first, Elena realized, showing the footage to Vesrin. Your people have been searching for refuge across multiple systems. Vesrin's eyes darkened. The sundering scattered our kind across the stars. We thought ourselves alone. If others survive. She trailed off as proximity alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Elena rushed to the command console. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, she reported, her training taking over. Colonial registry, but... She frowned. These identification codes don't match any known military or civilian patterns. Because they're fake, came a new voice. Dr. Marcus Chen, Elena's chief researcher, burst into the room, his tablet displaying complex scanning data. Commander, I've been analyzing the energy signatures Vesrin shared with us. They're not just shield configurations, they're the key to something much bigger. Something that could revolutionize interstellar travel itself. Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. And someone else knows it. The other dragons weren't just found by chance. They were being hunted. Vesrin gathered her children closer, their scales bristling with defensive energy. The sundering was no natural catastrophe, she revealed. There were those who sought to harness our biological connection to quantum fields. They failed to control us, so they tried to destroy us instead. The facility shook as the unknown ships entered orbit. Elena's console lit up with an incoming transmission from Colonel Wade. Commander Reyes, he said, his earlier pretense of bureaucratic concern replaced by cold efficiency. You will transfer the specimens to our custody immediately. Their biological capabilities are now classified as vital to colonial defense. Elena looked at Vesrin, at the three young dragons who had already taught her team so much, who had shared their knowledge freely in exchange for simple sanctuary. She thought of the regulations she had already broken, and the oath she had sworn to protect her colony. Then she smiled, reached for her console, and began systematically locking down the facility's security systems. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Colonel, she said. You see, I've just granted our guests full diplomatic status under Article 7 of the Colonial Charter. Any attempt to forcibly remove them would constitute an act of war against a protected species. Wade's face contorted with rage. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Commander. These creatures. These people, Elena corrected firmly, are under my protection. And if you want them, you'll have to go through me and my entire engineering corps first. As if to emphasize her point, the facility's new hybrid shields flared to life, incorporating both human and dragon technology in a display that lit up the evening sky. Elena knew she had just committed herself to a path from which there was no return, but as she saw the pride in Vesrin's eyes and the hope in her children's faces, she knew it was worth it. The real question was, how many other dragons were out there, fleeing across the stars? And how far would Wade's mysterious backers go to capture them? As proximity alarms continued to blare, Elena began preparing for a siege that would test not just their defenses, but the very foundations of trust between two species who had only just begun to understand each other. The SHIELD facility's command center had become a storm of activity. Elena's engineers worked alongside Vesrin's children, merging dragon knowledge with human technology in ways that defied conventional physics. Outside, Wade's ships maintained their threatening orbit, but they hadn't yet risked an attack against the hybrid shields. They're waiting for something, Elena muttered, studying the tactical display. The enemy vessels had arranged themselves in an unusual pattern, leaving obvious gaps in their coverage. Almost as if. Commander. Dar. Chen burst into the room, his face pale. The deep space sensors just picked up quantum distortions. Massive ones, unlike anything we've ever recorded. Vesrin's head snapped up, her copper scales rippling with alarm. No, she breathed. They couldn't have. She turned to her children, who had stopped their work at their mother's distress. They've rebuilt it. The quantum harness. Before Elena could ask for clarification, reality itself seemed to shudder. The tactical display exploded with warnings as a massive vessel materialized in orbit, its design unlike anything in human records. Its surface rippled with the same kind of energy fields that Elena had observed in the dragon's natural defenses, but twisted, corrupted. That ship, Vesrin said, her voice heavy with ancient grief, is powered by the essence of my fallen kin. The ones who didn't escape the sundering. Elena's communication system crackled to life, displaying not Colonel Wade's face, but that of a woman whose elegant business attire couldn't quite hide the predatory gleam in her eyes. "Commander Reyes," she said smoothly. "I am Director Evangeline Frost of the Prometheus Initiative. I see you've been harboring some rather valuable assets." "They're people, not assets," Elena shot back, even as she signaled her team to begin emergency preparations. "And they're under colonial protection." Frost's smile never wavered. "Protection? My dear, we're not here to harm them. We're here to fulfill their destiny. To help them achieve their true potential as the key to humanity's dominion over the quantum realm." Young Lysander pressed against his mother's side, his scales dulled with fear. "Like they helped the others?" he asked, his voice carrying a child's innocent outrage. "The ones whose screams we still hear in the void?" Frost's expression hardened. "Such dramatic creatures. Colonel Wade, begin the extraction protocol." The facility shook as concentrated beams of corrupted quantum energy struck their shields. Elena watched in horror as the hybrid defenses, which had easily repelled the ion storm, began to waver under this twisted assault. "The harness," Vesrin explained quickly, gathering her children close. "It doesn't just corrupt our natural energy manipulation abilities. It can force us to obey, to become living weapons." Elena's mind raced. They couldn't evacuate, the dragons were too large for standard escape vessels, and Wade's ships controlled all approaches. Fighting back seemed equally hopeless against weapons powered by corrupted dragon essence. Then she noticed something on her engineering displays. The enemy's quantum beams weren't just attacking their shields, they were trying to establish a resonance pattern. A pattern that looked eerily similar to the ion storm, Elena whispered. She turned to Vesrin. "You said your people mastered similar challenges millennia ago. Could you use the storm itself as a weapon?" Understanding dawned in the dragon matriarch's ancient eyes. "Not as a weapon," she corrected. "As a key." She turned to her children, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. The young dragons immediately began manipulating the facility's energy distribution systems, their scales glowing with concentrated power. "Director," Elena said, allowing herself a small smile, "you forgot something crucial about quantum mechanics. Observation affects reality." Before Frost could respond, Vesrin and her children began to sing. It wasn't music as humans understood it, but rather a complex manipulation of quantum fields that reached out to the ion storm still raging in the planet's upper atmosphere. The storm that had brought them together in the first place. The tactical display exploded with new warnings as massive surges of ionic energy began to cascade through the orbital space. But these weren't random, they moved with purpose, guided by the dragon's song. "Impossible," Frost breathed, her composure finally cracking. "The containment fields are being overwhelmed," Elena finished for her. "You studied dragon biology, Director, but you never understood their true power. They don't just manipulate quantum fields. They're part of them." The quantum harness vessel began to shudder as the ion storm, amplified and directed by the dragon's harmonic resonance, excited the corrupted essence trapped within its systems. Throughout the ship, the tortured spirits of fallen dragons stirred, awakened by their kindred song. "You wanted to harness their power?" Elena asked, watching as the massive ship's systems began to fail. "Well, now you're seeing it. But not as a weapon. As liberation." The command center filled with ethereal light as the dragon's song reached its crescendo. In orbit, the quantum harness vessel erupted not in an explosion, but in a cascade of pure quantum energy. The trapped essences of countless dragons, freed from their technological prison, soared into the ion storm, their combined power sending Wade's smaller ships tumbling through space. Director Frost's transmission cut off abruptly, but Elena knew this wasn't over. The Prometheus Initiative had invested too much in their dragon harvesting program to give up after one setback. As the light faded and the young dragons collapsed in exhaustion, Elena turned to Vesrin. They'll be back, she said quietly. The dragon matriarch nodded, watching the storm above with newfound purpose. Yes, she agreed. But next time, we'll be ready. Together. Elena looked at her tactical display, already noting the signals of approaching colonial reinforcements, real ones this time, drawn by the massive energy discharge. She knew that once this story got out, once other colonies learned the truth about both the dragons and the Prometheus Initiative, everything would change. The question was, would humanity choose to be partners in that change, or would they follow Frost's path of exploitation and dominion? As Elena watched her human engineers tend to the exhausted dragon children, she allowed herself to hope for the former. A week after the battle that had revealed the true face of the Prometheus Initiative, Nova Esperanza's shield facility had transformed. What was once a purely military installation now hummed with the combined energy of human technology and dragon quantum manipulation. Engineers and dragons worked side by side, preparing for the war they all knew was coming. Elena stood in the newly constructed integration chamber, watching as Lysander demonstrated an advanced energy configuration to a group of wide-eyed human scientists. The young dragon had grown more confident in recent days, his natural talent for teaching matching his grasp of quantum mechanics. He reminds me of his father, Vesrin said softly, joining Elena at the observation window. Always eager to share knowledge, to build bridges between different ways of thinking. Elena turned to the dragon matriarch, noting the mixture of pride and sorrow in her ancient eyes. You've never spoken of their father before. He died defending our archive world from the Initiative's first attack, Vesrin replied, her scales dimming slightly with remembered pain. He believed, as I do, that knowledge should illuminate, not dominate. The Prometheus Initiative never understood that distinction. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Chen's arrival. The chief researcher's usual scholarly calm had been replaced by barely contained excitement. Commander, you need to see this, he said, projecting a holographic display into the air between them. The display showed a series of quantum signatures scattered across known space. We've been analyzing the energy patterns released when the harness was destroyed, Chen explained. They're acting like a beacon. Other dragons are responding. Vesrin's eyes widened. The song of liberation, she breathed. It travels through the quantum fields themselves. My people are gathering. Before Elena could respond, her tactical officer's voice crackled over the intercom. Commander. Multiple colonial vessels approaching. They're broadcasting official council credentials. Elena exchanged a glance with Vesrin. They'd been expecting this since news of the battle had spread through colonial space. The council couldn't ignore such a dramatic revelation of both alien allies and human conspirators. The meeting chamber was packed and the council representatives arrived. Elena had insisted that Vesrin and her children be present not as subjects of discussion, but as equal participants. The sight of the dragon family sitting calmly alongside human military officers certainly made an impression on the delegates. Council President Diana Rhodes, a veteran of colonial politics, managed to maintain her composure as she addressed the unusual assembly. Commander Reyes, your recent actions have placed us in an unprecedented situation. With respect, Madam President, Elena replied, the situation was unprecedented the moment the Prometheus Initiative decided to weaponize an intelligent species. A species, Vesrin added, her voice carrying that weight of ages that still commanded attention, that now offers humanity a choice. Continue down Director Frost's path of dominion, or join us in exploring the true potential of our combined knowledge. Rhodes studied the dragon matriarch carefully. You speak of cooperation, yet the power you demonstrated against the harness vessel suggests your people could easily overwhelm our defenses if you chose. Power without wisdom destroys itself, Vesrin responded. We learned this lesson painfully during the first rise of our civilization. It's why we chose to scatter among the stars rather than dominate them. Elena stepped forward, pulling up tactical displays showing the initiative's known operations. The real threat isn't from the dragons, Madam President. It's from those who would exploit them. The Prometheus Initiative has infiltrated multiple colonial administrations. Colonel Wade's defection proves they have military support. And industrial backing, Dr. Chen added, displaying financial records his team had uncovered. The quantum harness project required massive resources. They're being funded by someone with considerable influence. Rhodes frowned at the evidence. You realize, Commander, that acting on this information means acknowledging the dragons not just as refugees, but as full allies. The political implications. She was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the tactical center. Elena's officers rushed to their stations as warning signals blared. Multiple quantum distortions detected, an officer reported. Similar to the harness vessel, but smaller. They're appearing throughout colonial space. Vesrin's children pressed close to their mother, their scales resonating with the distant quantum energies. More hunting ships, Lysander said, his young voice tight with fear. They're looking for the others. The ones who answered the song. Elena turned back to the council president. Madam President, we're out of time for political debate. The initiative is mobilizing. Either we stand together, or they'll pick us off one by one. Rhodes looked around the chamber, at the humans and dragons working seamlessly together, at the displays showing the approaching threat, at the young dragons who represented both the initiative's targets and humanity's hope for a greater future. Very well, she said finally. By emergency powers granted to this council, I hereby authorize the formation of a joint human-dragon defense force, under your command, Commander Reyes. Elena nodded, already moving to the tactical display. Thank you, Madam President. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a war to plan. As humans and dragons gathered around the planning table, Elena felt a surge of pride. This was more than just an alliance of necessity. It was proof that different species could choose cooperation over conquest, knowledge over power. The coming battle would test that alliance to its limits. But as she watched Vesrin's children teaching human engineers the intricacies of quantum harmonics, Elena knew they had already achieved something the initiative never could, true partnership, freely given and mutually respected. Now they just had to survive long enough to show the rest of humanity a better way. The quantum fields above Nova Esperanza rippled with energy as more dragons arrived, drawn by the song of liberation. Each new arrival brought tales of narrow escapes from initiative hunters, but also hope. Hope born from the knowledge that they were no longer alone. Elena watched from the command center as Vesrin greeted each refugee family, her copper scales gleaming with welcome. In just 2 weeks, their sanctuary had grown from a single family to a thriving community of over 30 dragons, each bringing unique knowledge and abilities. But with each arrival came increased risk. The initiative's hunting ships prowled the edges of colonial space, growing bolder by the day. It was only a matter of time before Director Frost launched her final offensive. Commander, Dr. Chen called from his station, the quantum signature analysis is complete. You need to see this. The holographic display showed a massive energy buildup in a supposedly abandoned sector. They're not just building another harness, Chen explained, his voice grim. They're building 5 of them. And these designs. He shuddered. They've found a way to amplify the captured dragon essence exponentially. How long? Elena asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. 3 days. Maybe 4. Vesrin joined them, her ancient eyes studying the data. They mean to capture all of us at once, she said. With that many harnesses, they could enslave every dragon in colonial space. Elena's tactical display suddenly blazed with new alerts. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, her officer reported. Initiative signatures, but different. The main screen showed a sleek vessel approaching their position. Its design was clearly initiative technology, but its energy signature was wrong, somehow incomplete. Interesting, came a familiar voice as Director Frost's image appeared on their screens. But this time, she wasn't alone. Colonel Wade stood beside her, along with several other high-ranking colonial officials Elena recognized from security briefings. "I hoped we might have one final discussion," Frost continued, her predatory smile unchanged. "A chance to avoid unnecessary bloodshed." Elena glanced at Vesrin, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "We're listening," Elena replied carefully. "Your little alliance is impressive," Frost admitted. "But ultimately futile. Even now, my new harnesses are coming online. But I'm not unreasonable. Surrender the dragons peacefully, and your colonies will be granted exclusive access to quantum field technology. Resist." Her smile widened. "Well, I'm sure you can imagine." Before Elena could respond, young Lysander suddenly rushed to the quantum field display. "Mother," he called, his scales flickering with excitement. "Look at their ship's resonance pattern." Vesrin studied the readings, her eyes widening in understanding. "Of course," she breathed. They couldn't resist testing their theories on themselves. Elena looked between them, then back at the display showing Frost and her conspirators. There was something off about their movements, a subtle wrongness she hadn't noticed before. "You didn't just experiment on dragons, did you?" Elena asked, realization dawning. "You tried to merge dragon essence with human biology. To give yourselves their powers." Frost's smile turned cold. "The next stage of human evolution. Once we perfect the process." "You're dying," Vesrin interrupted, her voice heavy with something like pity. "The quantum fields reject the forced merger. Every use of those stolen abilities burns away a little more of your humanity." "A temporary setback," Frost snapped, but Elena could see it now, the slight tremor in her hands, the unnatural pallor of her skin. "Once we have a large enough dragon population to study." "You still don't understand," Vesrin said. She turned to her children, who had gathered with the other young dragons. "Show them." The dragons began to sing, not the battle song they had used against the harness, but something deeper, more fundamental. The quantum fields around the colony rippled in response. "What are you doing?" Frost demanded, real fear creeping into her voice as her ship's systems began to fluctuate. "Teaching," Vesrin replied simply. "As we should have done from the beginning." The song grew stronger, and Elena watched in amazement as the corrupted quantum fields around Frost's ship began to stabilize, to heal. The director stumbled, clutching her chest as the stolen dragon essence within her responded to the harmonics. "The power you sought," Vesrin continued, "cannot be taken. It must be freely given, freely learned. Your harnesses twist the quantum fields, but our song restores them to their natural state." Frost's image flickered as her ship's artificial quantum fields began to dissolve. "No. I won't let you ruin everything we've built." She reached for a control panel, but Colonel Wade grabbed her arm. The military man's face was a mask of pain and revelation as the song worked its way through his corrupted biology. "Enough," he gasped. "We were wrong. All this time, we were so wrong." The next few hours were chaos as initiative ships throughout colonial space went dark, their artificial quantum fields unraveling under the dragon's harmonizing song. The half-transformed conspirators were taken into custody, their bodies slowly returning to normal as the stolen essence dispersed. In the end, Elena stood with Vesrin atop the shield facility, watching the sun set on a changed world. The quantum fields above rippled with the natural songs of free dragons as more arrived, no longer fleeing, but coming to teach and learn. "We'll need to establish proper diplomatic protocols," Elena mused. "Cultural exchange programs, technological cooperation agreements." "Already thinking of the future?" Vesrin asked, amused. "Someone has to," Elena replied with a smile. "We have two civilizations to rebuild." Below them, human engineers worked alongside dragon instructors, learning to understand rather than control the quantum fields. Lysander led a group of young humans and dragons in basic quantum harmonics, his earlier fear replaced by the joy of sharing knowledge. Not rebuild, Vesrin corrected gently. Transform. What we create together will be something entirely new. As if to emphasize her point, the quantum fields above shimmered with unprecedented patterns as human and dragon songs intertwined, creating harmonies that neither species could achieve alone. It was, Elena realized, just the beginning of what their peoples could accomplish together. The stars beckoned above, no longer a battlefield, but a frontier of infinite possibility. And this time, they would explore it not as conquerors or refugees, but as partners in the greatest adventure their species had ever known.